The Alonso era is here, and while the scorelines of course aren't the main focus in a debut match, it gave us some early insight into how Xabi Alonso plans to tactically revolutionize Real Madrid. So let's take a closer look at how he's set up. After over a decade with managers who are less tactically focused, some early patterns of play were evident right from the off. For the most part, despite being a back four on paper, Alonso spent most of the match trying to build with a back three. Part of this may have been because Al Hilal defended in a 4-4-2 that was passive, but could spring into an aggressive press at a moment's notice. So the three ensured that they would always have a spare man to use as an outlet. And from the deeper zone, Alonso's influence is already beginning to peek through. Because what do you see here? Courtois is much more aggressive with his positioning than usual, as he would look to push up between the centre-backs to be the third man, meaning all of Madrid's midfielders could then stay higher up the pitch, where they could try and cause maximal damage. But if Al Hilal were pressing, or if Madrid had managed to progress out of their own third against a deeper block, things changed slightly, as of course Courtois couldn't be the third man without taking suicidal levels of risk. In these cases, it was the normally attacking left-back, Fran Garcia, who was expected to tuck in. And it will be interesting to monitor whether throughout the season, Alaba resumes his left-back duties, as he seems tailor-made to invert early and provide excellent ball progression abilities, especially with Hyson improving in his debut. But Trent's role was fascinating on the other side. Garcia deep allowed Vinicius to stay wide. But, of course, Rodrigo at times likes to hug the touchline as well, limiting the opportunities for Trent to overlap outside. This, of course, meant that Trent was inverting, and we saw two types of inversion from him. Primary method was inverting ahead of the midfield and becoming an attacking midfielder. And here is where we truly begin to see Alonso's fingerprints on the side. As with Bellingham high in the left-hand half space, Alonso opted for a 3-4-3 box system. This allowed Trent into these dangerous positions, where he could theoretically get shots off or unleash his mesmeric crosses. All of this was done while still allowing Rodrigo to have isolations to use his individual skill against his man, while the sheer athleticism of Valverde acted as the ultimate cover. But here's the thing. With this setup, Rodrigo's isolations rarely occurred, and that's because even when Madrid started with the ball on the left to draw Al Hilal across, the Saudi club could still commit to double-teaming Rodrigo as soon as the ball came across. But why was that? Well, it came down to how Trent was operating in his debut. From these high-up positions, Trent was not showing much dynamism, whether to overlap outside of Rodrigo or to make underlapping runs to expose the spaces left by the double team through those aggressive half-space runs, which would have discouraged Al Hilal from committing two men to Rodrigo in the future. This was compounded by Valverde also still being central rather than providing the outlet option deep. Again, with the aim of drawing a man higher up the pitch to let the winger have his isolations. And this leads us to the second type of inversion from Trent, which happened more and more as the match wore on. And this inversion was to move into the deeper midfield position, with Valverde instead being pushed up as the second attacking midfielder. It's a subtle tweak, but one that completely changed the dynamic down the right-hand side. And one of those tweaks you see here. The Englishman from these positions was much more willing to do what we've discussed, providing an option from this deep half-space position to ask Al Hilal whether they wanted their winger to follow and allow the isolation or leave Trent in acres of space. At the same time, Valverde was much more synergistic with Rodrigo, firstly beginning to provide those runs through the half space, but more importantly, being willing to rotate to the outside. So now the Brazilian had the option to tuck into the central space, introducing an element of unpredictability. The usual outcome was Al Hilal being a little more passive and choosing to protect the flank and giving Trent more and more room as the match wore on. And Trent's influence slowly began to grow, with those raking diagonals occurring more frequently, which in turn allowed Vinicius more isolations. But with Al Hilal defending compactly for the most part, Real Madrid struggled to find their dual tens in positions where they could create, meaning there was heavy dependence on the wide regions for creativity. This is part of the reason why in the second half, Alonso brought on Arda Güler for Asensio, and he played a much deeper role than usual, providing the much-needed attacking thrust, and springing ahead of Valverde often to get into zone 14, from where he could look to thread passes through, or, more often, attempt shots from range. But one of the things Xabi Alonso is famed for is that high press at times, and that is the exact opposite from how Real Madrid have operated under these two men. So could he bring his Leverkusen pressing ideals over to Los Blancos? In this one match, the answer was sort of. Just before we get there though, with the season over, if you've always wanted to learn tactical analysis at a deep level, now is the perfect time, as Tactical Mastery is now live. When I began my tactical analysis journey over a decade ago, there weren't many resources online that could reliably teach you everything you need to know for high-level tactical analysis. And when I looked online a year ago, not much had changed. So I decided to fix that and created Tactical Mastery, which is your one-stop to master tactical analysis. It's the program that I wish I'd had when I was beginning, and essentially, it allows you to shortcut what took me 10 years of learning into just a fraction of the time. And because you love analysis, I've made sure the program is highly detailed, with over 9 hours of pure analysis education, while still being presented in the same simple FMS style that you know from the channel. And here's the beauty: joining Tactical Mastery also gives you access to a community of other people like yourself from around the globe, so you're never learning in isolation. And one of the key features is our group analysis sessions, where we pick a match and analyze it as a group, allowing you to get feedback on your analysis quickly, meaning that you will learn faster than you thought possible. Tactical Mastery is not a subscription trap that's designed to keep you locked in forever. It's a once-off, meaning that you're one step away from transforming your tactical understanding to the link in the description below. See, from the goal kick, Madrid were positionally aggressive with their press, with Bellingham joining Garcia ready to press the centre-backs. Especially early on in the encounter, rather than initially opening up the pass into the fullback at first, to then allow Real Madrid to swarm Al Hilal with the wide pressing trap, the wingers instead pushed up onto the fullbacks immediately, looking to cut out all options. But there were some issues with this shape. Al Hilal would shift to a single pivot, drawing Valverde, and occasionally a double pivot, which at times did draw Tchouaméni higher up the pitch. But here's the thing: Al Hilal weren't even looking to play into the pivots for the most part. Instead, Real's pressing shape meant that if Al Hilal pushed all their remaining men high, they had created a massive chasm between Real's defensive unit and their offensive one. And with target men as prominent as Milinkovic-Savic, they were able to bypass that press, then allowing the knockdown into the space between the lines, or the flick on in behind, and the Saudi Arabian club did look dangerous in these phases. As the match wore on, Los Blancos adapted, with Valverde and Tchouaméni staggering completely, so Real Madrid now had at least one more midfielder to defend the longer ball. But here's the thing: at times, even when Al Hilal began short, despite Madrid positionally being optimal for that immediate man-to-man press as you can see here, the intensity was not quite there, meaning that the fullback has time to get his head up and pick out a pass before the press comes in, meaning Madrid's structure slowly begins to crumble. But one thing Madrid certainly showed was more coordination when dropping deep. It was rare for any players to be caught high up the pitch when it came to falling into a more compact defensive mid-block, which in the first half was fluctuating between a 4-1-4-1 and a 4-4-2. Inzaghi had decided attacking in a 3-2-5, and this final line overload actually caused huge problems. The Madrid 4-4-2 tended to be quite narrow, which led to some issues, as Al Hilal identified the narrow positioning of Rodrigo as a weakness to target. When the ball was down the Al Hilal right, two men often moved to the flanks on the left, with both ready to receive, knowing that Rodrigo would struggle to recover in time from his more narrow central position when the switch came. When the ball was on the right, however, it was a more traditional front five shape, with Al Dosari aggressively moving into the half space, pinning Trent in and freeing Renan Lodi to receive and subsequently combine with him down the flanks, and this caused huge issues for Madrid, particularly in that first half. But Alonso had already spotted these issues, and the halftime adaptation was quick in coming. Gone was the 4-4-2 defensive shape, and instead he shifted to a 5-3-2, allowing that final line to be picked up man-to-man, while also giving Vinicius the scope to be more deadly on the transition. And while Real's defense didn't immediately look impermeable by any means, it was much improved. So of course, a single match with no preseason is way too early to make any sweeping declarations about Alonso's Madrid. But I'm really curious, what did you make of this match tactically? Leave it down below.